Okay, Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to all of you attendees at this ISAS event. It's actually a joint event with ISAS and MEI, Middle East Institute, brotherly institute downstairs. Okay, and the subject is India and the Gulf, Modi turns west. But before I commence, I should like to extend my warmest felicitations to all our Pakistani and Indian friends who celebrate their Independence Day today and tomorrow. Yeah, the fact that these are on two different days is not necessarily an early expression of the differences, but of course there are differences, they exist. But this is because, and we talked about this for a while at lunch today, not at lunch, at the cake cutting ceremony, it was because Mountbatten had to travel to Karachi, Pakistan, to install Mr. Jinnah as the Governor General, and he himself, of course, was the Viceroy, and then went back the next day to take over from Viceroyship to the Governor, to being the Governor General for India. So hence the difference. It's my very great pleasure, of course, to introduce our distinguished speaker for this afternoon, Professor P.R. Kumaraswamy of the JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Very well regarded expert on West Asia, author of a number of books on the subject. He's also the honorary director of the Middle East Institute in New Delhi, which is for present still a virtual institute, but in terms of stimulating thoughts on the Middle East, it has been playing a significant role over the last 8-9 years. 8-9 years, Professor?
2010 onwards.
Oh, okay, and onwards. Now, briefly to turn to the subject, it's about Prime Minister Narendra Modi turning west, which presumably includes both looking and acting west, I presume. As the abstract indicates, the view, his idea is to maximize gains through what Professor Kumaraswamy calls the economy development centric model approach. But as he also indicates that there is need for more sustained political engagement, and also the counter presence of third parties, which renders it somewhat difficult. And here the relevant third parties, of course, would be China and to a certain extent Pakistan. China's footprint, of course, is enlarging in the region. Xi Jinping's preferred model. His preferred model is what he calls oil and gas plus. She has recently toured the region, conducted a China-Arab States Cooperation Forum in Beijing, and agreed to pump in about $20 billion, I think, as a part of his BRI thrust to the region. Pakistan, of course, is also ever present in Arab hearts and minds in the Gulf, and also militarily leading the charge in Yemen. As you know, General Rahil Sharif is leading the Arab contingent, or whatever, the troops in Yemen. Another factor that would add to the complexity of regional politics is the regional politics of the Gulf itself. I was myself posted as an ambassador in Qatar for some years, and this was in the early 90s. And even those days, the rivalry was so stark that one didn't know whether to call this body of water Persian Gulf or Arab Gulf. And finally, we settled for the Gulf. It's called the Gulf. Though I noticed the professor has a book out, where he is having a book out, or rather has been having this every year. It's an annual publication. The flyer is on your desks, and you very bravely call it the Persian Gulf, etc. It comes out every year and has been coming out since 2012. Of course, of India's Israel policy is yet another issue that adds complexity to the subject. So, diplomatically speaking, Mr. Modi has his work cut out for him. But let us hear how Professor Kumaraswamy sees Mr. Modi's plan to exploit the opportunities and surmount the challenges. Professor, you have the floor for the next 30 minutes. 30 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A session. Professor Kumaraswamy.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you for all of you for coming to this occasion. And I was hoping there will be about 10, 12 people. That's the number I saw in the confirmation list in the morning. I said, okay, let's say a few points and then have a longer
Your reputation
discussion.
has preceded you.
I'm a little scary. Let's see how I can do it. If you look at India's relations with the Middle East or the Gulf, you have certain terminologies which are very common. Extended neighborhood, civilizational links, historical links, and people-to-people contacts. But if you look at all this rhetoric and the reality on the ground, there is really a gulf. And normally, one of the problems when it comes to the region is we don't walk the talk. And if you look at it, this has been the case. And we never even had what I would call a regional policy. You had a bilateral relations with all the countries, and somehow we thought that, no, while having a good relation with one country, we will manage it. This was very visibly manifested in the nuclear deal, 2005. If you remember that when Indian contingent went to Washington, they were thinking that, they will talk about the US nuclear deal, and they were asking about Iran. So therefore, we never even understood that, there are a lot of controversies and complexities in the region, but we need to manage it in a more cohesive fashion. Some broad statistics before we go to the nuts and bolts. The region, especially the Gulf, about the Persian Gulf, it's very simple. You can have a Bay of Bengal, you can have an Arabian Sea, you can always have a Persian Gulf. So that's the logic. So there is no other special. Then are we going to simply call sea because the Arabian Sea? No, it's an historical. One could argue with the name, and including India. The name India is not Indian, if you're all familiar with that. So therefore, they're all historical reasons, so that's the only reason. But if you look at it, Persian Gulf is India's largest trading partner. If you look at about 5 years ago, when the trade was close to 795 billion, Persian Gulf was about 20 billion, about 25% of our total trade was with the region. If you talk in terms of energy, we still get about 60+% of oil and gas comes from the region. And we have about 7.5 million Indians there. It's the largest concentration of Indians outside the region. And Saudi Arabia alone has about 3 million plus, the same amount in UAE. And these countries are, if you look at the top 20 trading partners, the Persian Gulf constitutes the bulk of it, except the 3 economies, Oman, Bahrain, and Yemen. Other than that, the remaining countries are India's largest trading partners. If you look at in every sense of the word, and then as of today, there are about 7 that we get the largest remittances from this region. So you naturally assume this region gets some maximum attention in Indian foreign policy making, which is not the case. We are stuck with the South Asian region. And with all due respect to all the countries and the citizens and your specialization in everything, if you look at a hardcore realist attitude, South Asia is a liability. There is nothing South Asia can give it to India. Basically, if India doesn't handle its relations with the neighbors, their problem will become your problem. In other words, that's more or less the case, whether it's with all due respect to all the countries. If India wants to progress, you should have a good relations with them, but it's only to a level that they are not going to be your strategic ally in the longer term. India's ascendance will not depend on South Asia. But that is not the case with the region. The Middle East is complex. It is enormous tension even without the Qatari crisis, but yet it is up to you how do you handle it. If you handle it well, Middle East is going to be enormous advantage in the long run. But having said that, if you look at during the last 10 years before Modi comes into picture, 2004 to 2014, the situation is pretty bad. And we had about 5 foreign ministers, and most of them are at stopgap arrangements. Only 2 ministers actually had a political influence, Pranab Mukherjee and Salman Khurshid. but most of them were stuck in the domestic coalition firefighting. In other words, if you look at it, the foreign policy was more or less left to a junior minister, E. Ahmed. He was looking after India's relations with the entire Middle Eastern region. But being a minister of state, there are protocol limitations, what he can do, what he cannot do. So that is how the relations were being played out. And that is visible. The last serious high-level state visit to the region was 2010 November, when President Pratibha Patil went to UAE and Syria. After that, from that period until Modi comes into picture, there was no visit by a president, vice president, or the prime minister to any of the Arab countries. Our contacts are primarily with Turkey, Iran, and to a lesser extent, Israel. In other words, we completely ignored the entire Arab countries in terms of visiting them. While we hosted leaders from this region, Indian leaders never visited that region until Modi comes into picture and he goes to UAE in August 2015. And if you look at from that period, since May 2014 till today, India has a political engagement with all the countries of the region. Either president, vice president, prime minister, or foreign minister have visited all the countries. Wherever there is an internal civil war situation, Minister of State was sent, whether it's Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, M.J. Akbar went. In Yemen, V.K. Singh went. The only country where India did not have a political engagement after 2014 was Libya. Otherwise, India had enormous engagement. And you may say that there is nothing unusual. You know, if you look at the last 10 years, UAE was one of the largest trading partners of India. Before Modi's visit, the previous visit was by Mrs. Gandhi 34 years ago. You can say the same thing about all the countries. Only with Iran, there was an enormous political engagement after 1992, and to a lesser extent, Saudi Arabia. Otherwise, we simply ignore most of the countries, we never even bothered. Lot of this, as a result, we only had what you and I would call transactional relationship. You just go and buy oil and that's it, nothing more than that. You never had a political engagement with any of the leadership. I think that was where the major drawback. And when Pranab Mukherjee went to Saudi Arabia, he said that, we are looking at about 400 to 500 billion investment in infrastructure. But investment is not going to come unless there is a political engagement. I think that is what Modi has done. But Modi's policy on the region is somewhat, you would say, two interesting things. Until today, he refused to attend any iftar parties hosted by even the president of the country. He's extremely reserved on this issue. And the only time he went to a mosque as a prime minister was last year when he accompanied Japanese prime minister. Otherwise, he refuses to go to mosque to any other places. The first place he goes in UAE was the Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi. So if you look at it, there is actually a dichotomy in Modi's policy. Within the country, I still have to worry about my constituency, which is very reserved, very hardline position. So I have to present myself as a radical or probably Hindutva representative. The moment he crosses the immigration counter in Delhi, he's a completely different person. And normally, this is once again is unusual. People tend to be more liberal within the family, hardliner outside. Whether it's a question of women's rights and all of them, the moment people go outside, they're entirely. But Modi actually does the opposite. Within the country, he's a hardliner. It has taken about 3 months to actually come out with a statement, lynching is bad. And but when it comes to outside, he's completely an inclusive, non-discriminative, secular Indian diplomat. That is how he is presenting himself. And the kind of countries he dealt with in the entire region, if you look at the entire Middle East, he has not ignored any country which is important. He started with UAE, then he went to Saudi Arabia, then Iran, Qatar, and finally Israel. And there are a lot of countries who want to host him, from Egypt to Morocco to Kuwait and everybody. And basically he's saying, what is there for me? more or less. In other words, if there is no shopping list, he's not going. Egypt wants it. He hosted Egyptian president twice. But what can Egypt give it to India except probably, I need more investment. So from his point of view, the agenda is simple. People argue that the same thing he practiced with China and Japan. So he was not, in the strategic understanding of Modi, he is not military or a foreign policy convergence. He is more interested in economic development because whatever we know from outside. By the way, one of the good things about the Prime Minister Modi is, in India today there is only one person who makes the decision and he doesn't tell anybody. So therefore, your understanding of him, as good as my understanding of him, as good as Suhasini Aide's understanding of Modi. So therefore, these are all in public domain. You can read him as it is. He doesn't want to be a one-time Prime Minister. So therefore, the second time it basically means economy. I think that is the common thread in all the countries, whether it's China, Japan, or Russia, or Israel, or Iran, or all these countries. If you look at one level, he talks more about security cooperation, but the bottom line is always economy. I think that is exactly what Modi has been doing all these years, which was not the case before. Okay. It's not going to be easy to do that. For the simple reason, as a country, we found out on quite a few things. We promised the moon and delivered the mouse at the end of the day. So we are not able to walk the talk on so many issues, whether it's a nuclear question, all of them. At least in the Middle East, you'll find out when Prime Minister went to UAE, both the countries agreed there will be a 75 billion investment in India from the Emirates. Nothing has come. And actually, as somebody was telling, they were ready to, in a suitcase, to bring it to India anytime. Just tell me, I'm ready. But we don't have the mechanism yet. So after 4.5 years, we have got only 1 billion from UAE. That's going to be a major drawback. And I think that is where the problem lies. So while Modi can, Abhimanyu in the historical context, you can break the stalemate, but others had to follow. So Modi turning west basically means he's saying that India's long-term stability is going to be having a good relation with the Gulf countries, primarily. And I think that is why, when he went to Israel last April, Israel was the last country he went. Because people were talking from ever since he became Prime Minister, it will be the first country he is going to visit. No such thing. And people started asking question, why is he not there yet? That was a question 2017 everyone was asking. So there is a fund is prioritizing the countries in terms of economic importance. But to follow it up, you need to have people who are willing to take it to the logical conclusion. And you must be knowing most of the Indian companies also, even the Indian private companies are not big enough. They simply, the old time, let me do very small little thinking. They don't have the size and space dimension. And I think that is where the huge difference is. What Modi wants to achieve with the region and what the Indian company, including Tata and all of them, they simply do not have the capacity to match up his imagination. So that's why, you'll see a huge gap between the two. But the personal connections are helping. When there is a rescue operation in Yemen, he spoke to Salman and said, okay, I cannot stop the offensive of the war, but I can give you a few hours of some sort of a ceasefire. You can carry out your rescue operations. He was able to rescue the people. Similarly, when the price of gas was going up, and India had to pay more price because of the oil and gas linkage, Qatar was willing to say, okay, I'll write it off. So in other words, he was able to use the private connections to do that. And he has been using the multilateral forum to meet the Gulf leaders. Ever since he went to Brisbane in 2014, he has been meeting the Saudi leadership in all the G20 meetings. The only exception was last year in Germany, because Saudi Arabia sent a junior minister there. Otherwise, he has met a crown prince, Salman, or his son in all the G20 meetings. Until recently, Indian leaders were meeting only Cuban and Palestinian and Venezuelan leaders. These are all important, but there are political messages because we are nothing to talk economically. But if you look at it, this is what he has been doing it. With Emirates, for instance, he has met them 4 times. Twice in Emirates and twice in India. So therefore, Emirates, with all due respect to Singapore, I feel that Emirates could become Singapore of the West. In the sense, it's a small country, it understands its strengths and weaknesses, and it is more prepared to cooperate with India than some of the other countries of the region. So therefore, probably what Singapore did to India in the 1990s, Emirates could actually do it. In the sense, okay, instead of me talking about myself, Emirates can talk about India. Okay, India is a good player. So therefore, it depends upon whether Modi will do what Narasimha Rao did in the 90s. In the sense, give a more leeway to Emirates. Within the process, Emirates could be a major partner in India. But all these countries want greater engagement with India, but somehow Indian establishment has been very reluctant. Engagement doesn't mean interference in the internal affairs. That's not the position. And one is not even talking about Indian mediation, not in the Gulf, not beyond the Gulf. Because mediation comes with a price. I don't think India is in a position to do any of the mediations. If there is a question, we can continue all of them. But what is interesting is there was a fundamental shift about 15 years ago in how India looked at the region. I think that took place when Jaswant Singh visited Saudi Arabia in 2001. And at that time, because till such time, India looked at the Middle East through the Pakistani prism. And that, again, there is an historical context to that. From the 1920s onwards, when India looked at the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Palestinian question, it is also a domestic context. The Congress party was competing with the League for the support of the domestic Indian Muslim opinion. So that continued till 47. After 47, the Congress Muslim League tussle became India-Pakistan contest. One Western diplomat actually mentioned in the 1950s that Pakistan is India's center of gravity. We never looked at the world beyond that. Well, important as it is, it has actually handicapped our ability to look at things without the prejudiced opinion. That continued during much of the Cold War. We were actually competing with them. And it's only after the end of the Cold War, certain compulsions forced us to look at things differently. If you're competing with Pakistan, you're a South Asian power. If you want to be Asian power recognized as an important player, you need to go beyond that. Other countries may actually put you, India and Pakistan, at the same level, but India started competing constantly with Pakistan, then you're going to stay as a South Asian power. I think that gradually forced India to de-link Pakistan, at least from the Middle Eastern context. And if you look at it from 2001, when Jaswant Singh actually made a statement that, Pakistan is there, but that's not an issue, but we are dealing with it on a one-to-one basis. I think that is where the shift takes place. And it also makes the other countries' life simpler. On any day, an Islamic country will feel affinity towards Pakistan, no matter what you do or what you don't do. Go back to 1971. They were not talking about human rights in Bangladesh. They were not talking about what happened to the people of East Pakistan. But for them, loyalty to Pakistan and Islamic identity was more important than human rights and everything else. So therefore, the moment you put Pakistan on the table, you actually complicate the relations for the other person. So if you, from 2000 onwards, India was simply saying, okay, you do whatever is Pakistan, that's your issue. Let me talk about issue. Which basically meant not that you are ignoring Pakistan, no. Basically, you are looking at, is there any way I can find issues in which we can cooperate? If you look at even relations these days, once upon a time, an husband and a wife have to agree on everything. Which food to serve, which food to... But today, life has become more complex. How many families have the identical food, husband and wife? You tell me, in this room. Do you watch the same movies? Do you like the same music? In my case, we don't even live in the same city. I live in Israel, my wife lives in Jerusalem during almost 10 months of a year. So, if you look at it, the world has become more complicated. So therefore, you have to look for issues you agree and just ignore issues you don't agree. I think that is what the relationship has taken us. And therefore, Modi was able to deal with all the countries. If you look at it, Pakistan never figures in any of them, directly or indirectly. When you talk about cross-border terrorism in Saudi Arabia, you're not talking about Kashmir alone or any other issues. You are basically talking about what the Iranians are trying to do in Bahrain. So if you look at it, the template has changed. Terrorism is not a threat only to India. Terrorism is a threat to Saudi Arabia. And for me, it's a threat. For some of the countries, it's a survival question. So ISIS is a fundamental threat to the Saudis and the Jordanians than to India, Pakistan, or somebody else. So for me, it's a security threat. For them, it's a survival. So therefore, that is how the template has changed. So while Pakistan is important in its own level, it no longer plays the dominant role in India's relations with the Gulf. I think that is where the shift takes place. And if you use this as a template, China is also, we need to handle in the same way. And we all of us know that if you want Indian attention, all you have to do is, China is doing something with my country, then India will suddenly wake up. Otherwise, you don't even exist. This has been the Indian position today. If you want Indian attention, China had to be raised somewhere. So then, okay, I will also invest, I will also do this, there will be a visit, all the things. So it can be actually like a Cold War. You can use China as to get Indian attention. It became a good diplomatic strategy. You can do that. But if you look at it, if your focus is economy, that is where the issue could be. If it's a political one, I don't think India should get into that logic. I'm saying it rather cautiously, not also because my wife is a Chinese national. So there is a personal angle to that. So China would be an economic competitor, especially in terms of energy, in terms of development, in all of them. I think that is where India should wake up. While Emirates and Saudi Arabia and everyone was interested in investing in India, in cooperating with India. You must be familiar with Ratnagiri, the oil refinery complex. And Emirates said, we will be 50% stake in the $44 billion trade. And Saudi Arabia said, we will also join. So in other words, there is an enormous interest of all these countries to take part in India. When it materializes, probably this will be the largest single investment in India has ever seen in terms of financial terms. 44 billion, 50% by the Emiratis and the Saudis in terms of refinery, in terms of oil supplies and everything. And some of these countries are actually saying that, no, very subtly, you are having a problem with Iran, but in terms of gas, in terms of pipeline, in terms of investment, sky is the limit for us. And why would this Abu Dhabi National Oil Company say, we will ready to have 10% stakes to India? They don't need Indian money. It's basically a political understanding. I'm ready to support. The same thing, Aramco is negotiating with India, saying that, okay, you can also have a stakes. Does Aramco need Indian investment there? It's a political message. It's a very subtle political message. And the Saudis are saying we are willing to step in whenever there is a crisis with Iran, over directly or indirectly in terms of oil supplies. So all the things are happening. And I think this is where I'll take you to a very subtle remark by King Abdullah before he came to India in 2006. He said something like, India is a friend, Pakistan is a brother. And I think it tells you a very interesting thing, which was repeated by the Saudi leadership in a couple of other incidents. Brother is given, and friend is something which you evolve over a period of time. I think, this audience is very much familiar with the Indian epics. I would rather be a friend than a brother. Because, we have seen how the brothers treat one another. So brother is an informed choice. But the only question is, so far, the Pakistan blocked India to look at the region in a very serious manner. So that has gone. And the Saudis and the Emiratis and others are willing to engage with India in a more substantial manner. Because it's not a question of visits, it's a question of willingness to invest in Indian infrastructure and all of them. And I won't be surprised if one of these Gulf countries are willing to simply say, okay, what's the price? Let me take over Air India. So I'm actually waiting for that day, because I don't know, because it would have happened but for the Qatari crisis. I think given the Modi's equation, and probably Emirate will say, okay, Jet Airliners, okay, thank you very much, you're not doing a good job. I would simply take over Air India rather than having a stakes in Jet. So what I'm looking, these are the political understanding. I won't be surprised if there is some behind the scene things are happening along those lines. The reason is there is a political understanding between the two sides. and which is essential for India's progress, and which is essential for Modi's re-election prospect. And the only money which is going to come is not from the NRI Indians and things, which is not going to take as much. It's basically personal benefits. It won't benefit the country. It's going to be sovereign wealth funds. I think if you look at in that context, so by looking at West, it's not a question of perceiving, he's positioning himself in a situation where the countries can actually look to India. And they also need to expand because, 9/11 and all sorts of things. And the US, whichever way one looks at it, is at least its influence in the region is on the decline. And if you look at ever since the 9/11, most of the things in the Middle East are happening in spite of the United States. If you temporarily forget the Trump phase, we don't know how far it's going to happen. If you just leave Trump for a while, whatever Obama did in his 8 years tenure, his friends were not very happy, his enemies are also not very happy. Whether it's a question of nuclear deal, Arab Spring, or any of the issues, and the US was not able to present a very clear-cut policy or to present itself as a dependable player. If you're familiar with all the great power argument, the question is not you are right and wrong. The question is, are you ready to stand up to your friends despite international unpopularity? Something Obama was not able to do. So we are not sure about whether he's supporting the Arab Spring or he's supporting Mubarak. In the process, he lost out both of them. And the Israelis were, better than anyone else, they were extremely happy that Obama's term ended. So I think that's the only reason, if you look at the before election, anybody but Obama. So they were prepared to accept anyone willing to, in spite of Trump's campaign rhetoric was not very favorable at that time. So if you look at it, US influence is declining, which means when India deals with the Gulf, you have to compete with Pakistan, in terms of political interest, so you have to be very careful how you are dealing with them. You have to compete with China in the economic sense of the word. And you have to compete with Russia because Russia wants to play a role, but is not in a position to take over the US role. And you have to accept that, at one level you are getting closer to the United States, but that closeness and proximity will not be very helpful in the Gulf region. Either US is not very interested in the region or its influence is not commensurate to what it was earlier. Which basically means, you have to do a lonely walk. Doing a lonely walk comes with all the pressure, which also means you have to be extremely careful in choosing people. So if you make economy as your driving force, you can possibly escape from getting into unnecessary problems like sectarian issue, power rivalries, and the Iran-Saudi controversies, because you want everybody to be on your friends, which is only possible if you don't get into any geostrategic, political, and other issues. Focus, as somebody said, as Clinton said during 1992 election, economy is stupid. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor, for those very well thought through remarks. But I, of course, would have asked you several questions in details, but I'll just stick to one fundamental question and then open the floor, which is with regard to your title, and I just hinted at it in my initial remarks. You say Modi turns west. Turn is the key word. When we talk about the east, for example, we say the Modi, earlier on India looked east and then Modi acted east. So the acting involved greater activity than simply looking. Whereas turning is at even a lesser level of attention. So is that the priority that you see Modi giving Middle East, that he's just turning to the Middle East, whereas he would have acted or even looked at the East? So is it, in terms of priority, the lowest in terms of India's focus on the regions around it?
I wouldn't put that way, but he has made the decision to turn. In the sense, the rank and file is yet to take the lead. That's where the problem is. Even today, if you look at 1.4 billion people, how many experts on the region you have got in the country? Probably about 24 people. For them, it's a full-time job. Everyone. You can talk about professors and academics and other places, just 2 dozen people. So, acting West basically means you need a ground-felt support. And you refer about the think tank which I'm running, simply because you recognize the importance of the region is not commensurate to the expertise in the region. And even if it's the media and everything, people write about the Gulf only when there is a crisis. Otherwise, people don't. It's only basically migration, energy, and trade, and that's it. So, in other words, it has not been institutionalized. And if you look at even the diplomats, tell me the top people in the diplomat, do they want to go to the Gulf region? Is it my priority? Okay, 3 important countries. It's Washington, Geneva, and maybe Australia, but not the Gulf region. So therefore, that's what I'm saying. He has done the turn because he's not able to act. 75 billion, they are ready. Somebody actually said, Kumar, I'm having a suitcase, where do I invest? So you don't have the infrastructure back. So he has prioritized West, the Gulf as a region, but to become a reality on the ground, you need a whole range of things which we don't have. That's why I said turns.
Okay, I'll recognize Mr. Berkey, and others please raise your hands, and then you introduce yourself, second, third.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A very interesting talk, but if I have understood your thesis, I'm afraid I'm in total disagreement with you. You seem to be suggesting that India can do great things by considering, by regarding, by acting as if South Asia is a liability. And it should concentrate on these small island economies and so on and so forth.
A little louder, Javed.
Sorry?
Little louder.
It's like saying that the United States can do very well by ignoring the rest of the world and concentrating on Puerto Rico and Bahamas and Bermuda. Or that Brazil can forget about its hinterland, Argentina, Colombia, Venezuela, and concentrate on the Caribbean countries. If India has an aspiration to be a global power, which it should, given its size, its population, its economy, its strategic location, it cannot, it must not regard South Asia as a liability. It has to work with South Asia. Only if it succeeds in working with South Asia can it ever expect to be what should be its due, a major role in the global system. That's one point. The second point is I'm a bit surprised. You didn't say anything about what Trump is doing to the world. President Trump is destroying the old global order. And he's doing it because he wants America to act alone. America first, for him, is what matters. He doesn't care about the rest of the world. He doesn't like any institution where there is a lot of countries working together. I'm a South Asian. I think like a South Asian, not like an Indian or a Pakistani and so on. We've got to recognize this, that we face a major challenge to the global system because of the way Mr. Trump is operating. What you have suggested is extremely short-sighted. I don't want to be rude, but I think it is very short-sighted in the sense that, these bunch of small islands are today rich in energy resources, and therefore they are the ones that India should be concentrating on, and so on and so forth. These are exhausting resources. They're not going to last for very long. My friend over here has written a wonderful book in which he suggests that a lot of these countries that you are talking very favorably about are non-viable states because nations have been built by them on the basis of non-nationals. So you really can't expect much of a future of these countries. So in a way, what I'm saying is, that I'm afraid, some very fundamental differences with the professor, our lead speaker today.
Okay. Professor, would you like to respond to
Yeah.
that? And then Dr. Subbarao has a question for you, and then I'll recognize young Mishra.
You know that ignoring someone simply because of the size, I think that is an arrogance we got into for a pretty long time. And you know, we said, you know, I think if I'm not wrong, I think
A little louder, please.
sorry, I think we had the same attitude even with Singapore in the 50s and the 60s. What you can do, you're imperial creation, and you know you're running dog of people actually said that some of the countries are running dog of imperial agents and all sorts of things. We had that condescending attitude towards that, and I think we paid the price heavily. In the sense, you know, if you look at Israel, you don't look at the 25,000 square kilometers, which is probably smaller than Gurgaon area, or the population is 7 million. So if you look at it, I think that is what got us into that. My question is, anyone who is going to teach me something, I'm willing to learn, no matter what is your size, what is your position is. And that applies to nation states also. Merely saying that no, emirate population is that, it doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't, that the moment I take an attitude, that arrogance comes in. And Indians actually said it. There are one diplomat actually said the population of this country is actually smaller than the army I commanded. That attitude doesn't take us anywhere. I think we have been through with that last 70 years. I think today if you look at it, I'm willing to look at things as they are. I may not like it. I'm saying that 1.2 billion people, I have to depend on somebody to... Okay, it may not be satisfying to my ego, but I'm willing to learn, whoever is willing to teach. I think that is what the attitude is. South Asia, you're right, I want a friendly relationship, fine. What I'm saying is, you cannot help my economic development, period. If I don't handle Sri Lankan question carefully, their terror will become my terror in Chennai. If I don't handle the Bangladesh, their problem will become mine. Kosi River will be a problem in Bihar, not in Nepal. So if you look at it, I need to look at things as they are, without any emotion of things. At the same time, I'm not saying hostile relationship, friendly relationship, everything is fine, but you are not going to be part of my growth story. That's what my submission is. Trump, even Americans are looking forward to, okay, let's wait for 2 more years. Okay, they're counting down. Okay, today with Trump, and I would rather say, okay, keep the expectation to the barest minimum and try to limit your negative consequences which wherever possible. There is no point in ganging up, it will make only things worse. So these are all individual countries will have to look issue by issue, but beyond that, there is nothing anybody can do. Let's know, it's a ganging up will make things worse. So, okay, this is okay, we'll wait for it. Another 780 days, we'll count down.
You used the word nation state once in your explanation. Would these states be nation states? I mean, how would you say, is Emirates a nation state, Bahrain, Qatar?
They are, if you look at the post-Ottoman states, one of the fundamental problem of all the states, including Turkey, is that they don't have inclusive national identity. None of them. Israel doesn't have, Iran doesn't have, even Turkey doesn't have. So there were states evolving. And for a very long time, it's a city-state, around the ruling families, and the territorial identity is almost alien to Islam. You talk about Ummah, not Watan. So therefore, they are evolving over a period of time. But now, if you look at a number of crises, people are actually looking at some sort of a identity based on territory. They are evolving states. So I think today you can say there is something, at least people feel, what is nationalism? It's, your identity. It's not, I can only describe a national thing. I cannot prescribe it. It's like the Jews feeling all over the world, why do you feel you are an Israeli, no matter where you live? So this is what is evolving. But I think that we need to accept as it is. It's entirely different question, how homogeneous it is, how it is not there.
Yeah, I think another point that Mr. Burke was making is that the wealth in these countries, mind you, I'm not yet prepared to call them nation states, these countries is exogenous. That is, it's not a product of human endeavor. These are from outside human efforts. and therefore by definition finite.
It's not outside, but it's a blessings from heaven, as you call it, right? Why would, that's exactly what you call it. It's a blessing. Why would they get it? Not in, you could have given it in Kerala. Why in the Gulf?
Having seen light earlier, I think they are more deserving of God's favor.
Exactly.
Yes,
So, leave it to
Dr. Kumaraswamy.
Professor, like Dr. Chowdhury and Dr. Burki before me, I'm unable to agree with your thesis.
Good.
I was intrigued by the title of your talk, Modi Turns West. Over the last 4 years, we had several sessions here. Modi turns east, has looked farther east than any prime minister before him. He's acting east. Modi makes the first foreign visit to Bhutan and say Modi is looking at the neighborhood. Modi goes to China, Modi is looking north. Modi meets the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Modi meets the south. So experts such as yourselves, construct a thesis around something that's happening accidentally. I want to, in particular, contest two statements you made. First, that Gulf region is a very important trading partner. Of course, Gulf region is a very important trading partner because we buy oil from them. Higher the price of oil, more trade with Gulf. It's nothing to do with exchange of goods or services. It's just determined by oil. And that was the case when Vajpayee was the Prime Minister. That was the case when Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister. That's the case today. So the fact that Gulf is a big trading partner doesn't mean much. Then I would also argue that Modi has had to turn west, or in particular, pay greater attention to the Gulf region, as opposed to Manmohan Singh, for example, because Modi had to establish his credentials. He's seen as a Hindu fundamentalist, therefore he had to go to the Gulf to cajole them or to befriend them, which Manmohan Singh did not have to do. So to see that as something that he did because he was more interested in the national self-interest more than other prime ministers, I think is wrong. So I want to contest those two statements. I think the test, the way I would evaluate Modi's policy towards the Middle East, if it's getting anything for us, is number one, is the economic condition, quality of living of the tens of millions of South Asians who've gone as migrant labor to the Gulf region, is it improving? They live in, you must have gone there, they live in appalling conditions. Is it improving? Second, is the Gulf region willing to withdraw its objections and invest sovereign wealth fund money in India and other parts of South Asia, even if India, for example, does not commit to Islamic finance? Okay. Third, I would say, is the Gulf region willing to import more from India? It's not just selling us oil, but are they going to import more from us? And fourth, I think the test will come in November when Iran sanctions tighten. We had a terrible problem last time in 2010, 11, 12 when Iran was under sanctions. How is Modi going to react to the tightening of sanctions on Iran? Is he going to, everybody is scared of America, including Indian firms, Indian banks. So how is Modi going to negotiate that? Thank you. Your comments.
Very important points. Yeah.
Okay. You're right. The academics tend to give a picture of Bhutan, and all of them were well taken. So that is what I said. When I said about the Emirates, the visit after 36 years, the kind of contacts, the 4 contacts since 2011 till today. And the engagement was not just only one country or one region. I'm talking the entire Middle East, which never happened even in the time of Nehru. That's what I'm telling you. I'm just actually making the complete foreign Indian visits from 1947 till today. All the major, the Prime Minister, President. And you'll see the things. Because it's not a question of 1-2 visits. He has been engaging with everyone in the region. And you tell me when was the last time it had from 47?
But I want to ask you, would Manmohan Singh not have been given the window for evacuation of Indians from Yemen, as opposed to Trump? You're saying that Trump got a special window, special dispensation?
I said Modi.
Modi, excuse me. Putatively, do you think that Manmohan
No, no.
Singh would not have been able to...
See, during Manmohan Singh, the only visit was to Saudi Arabia. 10 years, please sir, 10 years, 2 visits.
He didn't have to go.
That's not the reason. It's not Modi had to go because of what? Because of domestic reasons. That's only one, that's what I'm saying. That's only one part of the story. It's not a full story. I'm not saying no, you cannot just simply, this is the only reason. Foreign policy is always never made. You know it, I know it, not just because of one simple reason. There are so many complex. All I'm submitting is there is a sustained interest there, which is not the case before. At the same time, I'm telling the results we have to wait because we are inefficient in delivering. I'm saying that also. We need to deliver it. Even Lawson and Chabro, the total turnover is 18 billion, which is nothing. So even individual private companies do not live up to the imagination available. 75 billion, we got only 1 billion after 4. If you remember that, they were actually talking when the Emirati president comes to the Republic Day celebrations, we will announce it. No announcement was made because there is nothing to announce. And much of our investment from the Gulf are stuck in the legal system, whether it's a 2G and all of them. So therefore, you are not, that's one of the complaints the Gulf countries are. I'm ready to invest in your country. Can you protect me from all the litigations and everything else? Even Jet is also in litigation with Swamy. So if you look at that is what I'm saying. And, on the question of condition of laborer, how do we treat our people inside the country? You want the Saudis to treat Indians better than how I treat in my own house? That's little too much to ask. We need to improve our condition, then only we have the right to demand others. We know the kind of discrimination we do it across the country. And then we say Saudi Arabia should treat people like you treat a third world, like a British expatriate. It doesn't work. Sorry, sir, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. I wouldn't demand that.
All right. Points of view, of course, are different.
And Iran, yes, 1 minute. Iran, yes, it's going to be we made a mistake in 2005. We didn't handle it well. We could have simply told okay, we need a nuclear cooperation with the United States. We need energy cooperation with Iran. We could have just put things up front. We didn't. We simply thought, the problem is between Iran and the United States, between these two countries, I can carry on good relations with both of them. We didn't anticipate in 2005.
Can you do that? We'll come to that later. I mean, we are seeing that with regard to Iran, with Europe, it's getting difficult because, with Total and all that going out of
But I want
Europe.
to say for record,
Yeah.
that I would like Indian nationals in the Gulf region to be treated at par with British nationals in the Gulf region.
Yeah.
We should treat our people.
I mean,
no,
these
sir,
are basic
it's okay.
human rights.
Fine.
He's saying that in India, you should treat them better at home.
That's where we start. That's where we should start.
I know. I mean, I'm not being serious. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Razvi. Okay.
Very much.
Okay. It's a two finger.
What you have said.
Yeah.
India, you have probably made very valid observations on how India treats. But the point is that they have certain fundamental rights in India. I mean, I have seen exploitation of Indians, of South Asians. The 60%, So I think to simply say that it doesn't matter. It does matter. India doesn't treat a citizen, because Indian citizens have certain basic rights. And those rights can be enforced, but those rights are not available to foreign laborers in the Gulf states. I just wanted, while I have the floor, I mean, I have no doubt that you could probably cover, if you have more time, you've done that. There are two forces that move history. One is geography, and other one is demography. If you take history, Gulf states have been historically ruled, managed, and controlled by India during the colonial period. The links that India has, I mean, the reason why British were so protective of Gulf states because they wanted to make sure that the trade with India would continue without any major disruptions. So India has a long, historically, Gulf states are part of South Asia. They are the frontiers of South Asia. British policies established, in fact, all the legal framework which now the Gulf states are implemented in relation to citizenships. So there is a strong historical link between India and the Gulf states. Okay, I can't speak how much modern Indian states have actually related, but the fact is that India has had a long history of managing and controlling the whole region, what we call the Gulf states. Second was demography. You mentioned 7 million Indians. In Gulf, there are 3 million. Now, if you take a simple thing like avoided cost of education, I mean, these 20 or 30-year-old Indians, when they go to Gulf state they have not spent a cent on their labor. So if I calculated the Indian investment in Gulf in terms of the avoided cost of education runs into $1 trillion. And India is not getting anything in return for that. And what is really quite, the view said that India is now turning, Modi is turning to West. I think India's demography, Indian labor and South Asian labor in general have been very important in development of these countries. What I'm saying is that investment of India has in Gulf state is enormous. And I can't calculate. You just take $100,000 avoided cost of education for 20 years of labor that India must have spent in raising this to, people who go to, and you can look at $1 trillion. So, and India has enormous investment in Gulf states, and consequently, not only protecting its people, but also protecting its investment would require India to have actually a more enlightened policy. And I think gradually it may well be that that's how India is moving. I'm not really, I'm just simply surprised that maybe you didn't have the time not to emphasize the geographical, historical link of India and Gulf state, and also the Indian labor. I think Indian labor is one of the biggest assets the Gulf states have. And I think India has every right to demand that they get better return on it.
You know, I'm not giving an impression that it doesn't matter. You know, it's the only question is, you know, your ability to raise the issue with the other becomes very weak. That's exactly the point. So your questions is if they need an equal treatment, they're all fair, no issues on that. But the moment you raise it with a Saudis or an Emirate, you know, they will show you the latest newspaper, you know what you see. That's what I'm saying, that unless we know, it's very nice, I want to be treated like everybody else, fine. But the question is how the British treats his own citizen in every sense of the word. So the day I treat my citizen equally, then I have a right to demand same treatment from everybody else. That is my only submission. I'm not saying that we have a right. But you know, the other person will simply show the latest Times of India newspaper on my face. What I'm supposed to do with that? That weakens my argument. That's the only submission I'm making. I'm not saying everybody is equal. That's not the question. The question is your ability to do that. About 47 is, you're absolutely right. We have an enormous interest, enormous assets actually. Till 63, Indian currency is a legal currency in a number of countries. Okay, we are enormous. But somehow, this anti-colonial rhetoric simply got us into trouble. So if you look at it, that is why, you know, until recently, we don't even commemorate the First and the Second World War in the region. Because, you know, we thought it's a colonial British enterprise. So whether it's a Gallipoli campaign or is it a Palestine campaign or all of them, it is, even though the Indians died, 25,000 Indians are buried in Baghdad. There is a grave there. But, you know, it's only left to the military to commemorate. I don't think any Indian diplomat were asked, okay, annual day you go and lay a wreath, because right or wrong, it's an Indian soldier there. But we never had, because we looked at them through colonial prism. With the result, we simply moved away from using that assets. Post 47, you know, we didn't use that asset, and we are lost. About the demography, you are absolutely right. You can use the technical term, the brain drain. So, we contributed to them in that enormous. It's not that, you know, it's a free ride. You know. So why did they do it? We were willing to do the same job at a much lower price. If the Saudi had to be involved in the reconstruction, everything going on in 73 onwards, it would have an enormous economic cost for them. But the South Asians are willing to do it at probably a fraction of the price. You're right, the construction. But, you know, it's the moment the Indian political power increases, that is the time you may be able to raise it. But today, you know, your leverage is not very much there. And I think that's what the difficulty is. Even if you're right and wrong is fine, an academic can raise a point. A politician cannot raise a point at this point of time. And you are not there yet.
I think India has enormous leverage. India does not want to exercise it.
I'm not sure whether we have a leverage, but I would rather, you see, today I'm probably 6th largest economy. That they probably were a 3rd largest economy, let's talk. But not before that. I wouldn't do that, right? Because it will harm I want very gradual progress. Once we reach a point, then we will talk. As I say, peaceful rise of China. We'll rise there and we'll talk, not today.
Anish Mishra and Dr. Malan. And then you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Professor, for coming here and giving us this presentation. But unfortunately, I actually found 2 flaws in your presentation. The first flaw that you made was that you said you used the factor of Pakistan in India Middle East relations. I would like to say that actually Pakistan has not really been a factor, because the Middle East countries actually, although Pakistan has very deep rooted relations with the Middle East countries, but the relation with India is viewed as a separate relationship. And you said that because it's Pakistan, it's a Muslim countries, and it's natural for these countries to have some type of affinity with Pakistan. That's also not true, because if you look at the Kashmir issue, today there are only 2 Muslim countries that their official position on Kashmir is that we say, okay, whatever is the stance of Pakistan, will take that stance on Kashmir. And those two Muslim countries are not in the Gulf. It's Turkey and Azerbaijan. Even Palestine also, Palestine says that that this is a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. Even Palestine does not take the side of Pakistan on the Kashmir issue. So that's one point. So on the Pakistan factor, so I think that Pakistan is actually not a factor. Now, the second flaw that you said that you made was that in South Asia, countries have to go to China to get the attention of India. It's actually the other way around. Is that the countries, the South Asian countries are getting too much of attention from India, and then there's a need to actually balance India and China. I give 3 countries as an example. You take Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal. The foreign office of these 3 countries, in their daily business, they have a very hard time balancing China and India. So I think it's very flawed that that because I want the attention of India, so I have to go to China. In fact, So and another point that I thought was totally missing in your presentation, and I wondered why it was missing. And this is something that's to the credit of India, something India has done very well. You see, India has the very unique ability of maintaining relations with Saudi Arabia, Iran, Israel, and United States, while the relations between these 4 countries. And maybe you could share with us how does India has the ability to have relations with countries which are antagonistic to each other. I mean, something that's worth of thought is if you look at the RSS, for example, I wonder how are they able to really love the Jews and admire Nazis at the same time. So this kind of contradiction that basic RSS card would have. Maybe you can just share a bit on all those points. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll take Dr. Rani Malan as well. So we'll take 2 this time, and then of course Dr. Dorsey, James Dorsey, is raring to go.
Thank you. I guess I want to pick up with Dr. Subbarao's question of, you have largely presented that what has really changed about Modi is his frequent flyer policy in terms of visiting these countries. But I wanted to ask you again, substance-wise, what has changed, right? Because I think if we look at, Modi's had a neighborhood-first policy, right? But then you look at how much has it actually changed other than the frequent flyer trips? Aid to the region has gone down. What has actually substantively changed about ACTIS other than the name? And similarly here, you talk about he is engaging, and before it was in a transactional engagement. When I look at the engagements, you mentioned the Aramco deal. These are all transactional engagements that are taking place also. So isn't it all still a transactional engagement? Where has the substance really changed in terms of Modi's engagement with Qatar, with Iran, with Israel, etc.? Thank you.
Okay. Pakistan, we can. I said that if you take a look at from 45 till today, probably you'll take a second look at some of the points you're mentioning. The Kashmir, that's an interesting thing. Individual countries always take a different position, at least after 91. Before that, it was a different story. After 91, you see the subtle difference. The same countries who take an independent opinion are party to the OIC resolutions, all of them. All the 50 countries are part of the resolutions. Individually, they may take it. That's what you have to take a thing. So Turkey may say differently, Iranian supreme leader may say differently about Kashmir and Palestine as occupied territories, Muslims fighting for the same thing. The question is, and if you look at OIC as an issue, why is it that OIC is able to pass resolutions against India constantly? What's the logic? What is the force behind it? Whether it is effective or not, that's a different question. How much India is bothered by the OIC resolution, that's a different story. How is it that OIC passes the resolution constantly, even though there are other countries whose track record is worse? Number one. And Kashmir, you and I will have to solve it, whether we like it or not. It's not a question of what you do for others' good opinion. At the end of the day, you have to see in the mirror and say, do I look good? For our own sake, we need to solve it. How you are going to, that's a different story. But if you look at OIC, that's the one. China, you are right about China following India in the South Asian context. Absolutely, yes. But I was looking at a much bigger issue, not just only South Asia. Looking at, Africa and all the other places, take a look at it. Take a look at this, how far certain countries suddenly becomes important and what context. So South Asian part, yes, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, I agree with you. But if you go beyond that, Indian interest in a number of cases was spurred by China coming to the place. Any number of cases. On the question of balancing, yes, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran, US, it's a new balance which we have done after 92 with Israel, because we don't have relations with Israel for 40 years. So once we are, that's the one thing we are able to manage the relationship, even with Iran. So Israel was not very happy with India dealing with Iran from 1992, not today. When Dixit went to Israel in 93, he was asked about, what are you doing with Iran? That was the question he was asked in the press conference. So Iran was a major issue for Israel. But Iran also did not like what we are doing with Iran. So we managed the triangular relationship reasonably well, which is not the case with others. That partly because we did not have relations for 40 years, so therefore, we don't want to make another mistake, so we're managing it. We manage with Israel and Palestine over a period of time. Modi could go to Israel without going to Palestine. He can go to Palestine without going to Israel. And when Netanyahu is very much in town, he could actually make a couple of things which were not very friendly, which I see it as a maturing of relationship. And that is what I would sum it. A frequent flyer, yes. Not just he, foreign minister is also a frequent flyer. He's not the only one in that sense. What is tangible? This is what I'm saying, that not only contacts, at least they're opening the way for investments. Transactional basically mean buying and selling. But Aramco, that's what I said. Does Saudi Arabia need Indian money? Whether Abu Dhabi says 10% in my company, I'm willing to give it to India. Does Abu Dhabi needs it with such a huge sovereign wealth fund? That is what I'm saying, it's a political deal. It is not a commercial transaction. Commercial transaction is you go and buy milk in your shop for the last 30 years. Mother dairy type. So you're not going to marry into the family just because you are buying milk from the same place. When I said that, this is what I'm looking at. Saudi Arabia's willingness to say, okay, I'm going to ask India to invest Aramco. It's not a commercial decision. It's a political decision. When Abu Dhabi says 10% I'm willing to give it to the national oil company, India can invest, that's a political decision, not a commercial decision. It's not that, okay, I'm putting up a tender, whoever can invest it. No. When Qatar says, I'm going to write off the extra money I'm going to ask for you because of the price differentiation, it's a political decision. It's not a commercial one. It's not a commercial transaction. Why would they do it? They anticipate something in return. The return is political goodwill. Okay, we are going to, probably they are trying to wean India away from Iran. That's what they are trying to do. Very subtle way they're saying, okay, Iran is troublesome because you have a problem with Trump. Not only I can supply what Iran was supplying to you, but I can also give other opportunities. That is what they are doing it. The one most important thing was, my wife lives in Israel. I was traveling all sorts of routes. I went from Amman and Cairo, Istanbul, and even Moscow. This time I just flew over Air India. That is a decision at a political level. Why would Saudi Arabia, which did not allow any airliner to travel from Israel for the last 60 years? Previously, British BOAC used to come from London, Tel Aviv, Karachi, New Delhi in the 50s. A couple of Israeli diplomats who came to India, they actually stayed over Karachi from Lord and then went to Delhi. But after 60, they simply stopped any Arab countries, stopped any plane flying over the territory if are coming from Israel. Why would Saudi Arabia do that? People think that it's Netanyahu and Israel, Netanyahu and Modi. No, it's nothing to do with Netanyahu. It's basically MBS and Modi. Why would they do it? Why would they say, okay, I'm willing to allow Air India to fly over my territory? That is what I would say that. For me, that's the most tangible thing. Okay, I'm shifting a policy of 60 years. Without, so many people got credit. So many people praise Netanyahu for it. Netanyahu is not responsible for it.
Okay, the last two sets of interventions, yeah.
Okay. Serkan Yolacham from the Middle East Institute.
No. You have the floor. You have the floor.
All right.
The chair recognizes you.
Thank you, Professor, for your interesting talk. I found your approach quite refreshing, actually. And I want to focus on the title. You say Modi turns West. I understand the term West to be West Asia. And I observe two key developments, concurrent developments that change the political landscape in West Asia. One of them is the recent rapprochement among Iran, Turkey, and Russia over Syria. And the other is the what is known as the Qatar crisis. And these two together, in my opinion, have already created a rift in West Asia, a rift between what I would call a northern tier, led by Iran, Turkey, Russia, with connections to Central Asia, and converging over Syria and partly in Iraq. And on the other side of the rift is the southern tier, led by maybe the recent partnership between Egypt, Israel, and the Gulf countries, supported openly by the US. And I don't know if you agree with this assessment, but let's assume that you agree. I find India to be in a very unique position, in the sense that it can actually engage with these two tiers separately, without mixing them up. When it comes to security, economics, and so on, it is big enough, and it has both territorial and maritime connections that it can capitalize on to develop these two tiers separately. Would you agree with this assessment? And if so, how do you think Modi can engage with these two tiers at the same time? Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Dose, and then wrap up.
Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a few comments, but before I touch on the professor's remarks, I just want to say something on the labor issue.
On the
labor issue. I mean, there's obviously no question about the circumstances of labor in the Gulf. Fact of the matter is that India and all the other labor exporting states are equally guilty. It was guilty. It was a labor export market.
You have to speak to the mic.
It was a labor export market, reduce unemployment, and so on and so forth. So, and if we're going to look for a solution to that, it's not going to be an Indian solution. It's going to be a solution of all labor exporting states. But that's just as a remark. I think it's risky to use one size fits all for all the Gulf states. Fact of the matter is, the UAE doesn't need Indian money. Saudi Arabia needs money, no matter where it comes from. It needs foreign investment desperately. And yes, it has reserves, but those reserves are going down quickly. And its ability to raise foreign investment has, over the last year, significantly reduced. So I think it's too simplistic to simply reduce Saudi interest to geopolitics. I also think in terms of the analysis of the Gulf states, and going back to what Javid said and the question of who are these states and what future do they have, that again, it's very difficult to use one size. Oman's a state with a very deep national identity. The UAE and Saudi Arabia are still developing it. What I really found lacking or surprising that it wasn't part of your remarks was strategy and strategic interest. The interest in the Gulf, as I heard you projected, was purely economic. The interest in Iran is strategic. Look at Chabahar, which is not purely an economic interest. And that goes again to the heart of what are the Gulf states and where are they going. And in my mind, Saudi Arabia's future, not short-term but middle-term, is a second fiddle state in the region.
Pardon?
Is a second fiddle state in the region. It's not going to be a major player. It has a window of opportunity. And there was seemingly no recognition of that in your remarks. The last remark I'd made, which goes to more, if you wish, the political economy that you described. Again, I think in terms of post-Ottoman, identity of post-Ottoman states, it's very difficult to use one size fits all. Fact of the matter is, Turkey has an inclusive identity. It may not work for the Kurds, but fact of the matter is, if you accept the Kemalist principle of happy is he who is a Turk, the sky's the limit, which by comparison is not the case in Israel. And the last thing I want to say in terms of strategic environment is I think the influence of the US in the Gulf is far more complex. It's not simply a descending star. The fact of the matter is that I would agree with you on Obama, but on Trump, Israel's allies feel much more comfortable on a policy level. They may on a personal level find Trump crude. They might find him unpredictable on various levels. But in terms of policy, whether that's primarily Iran, and depending on who you talk to, Israel, there's a lot more solid grounds. And if you look at what, very carefully, and this is the last remark I'll say on this, at what bin Salman has been saying, Mohammed bin Salman, from 2015 onwards. And that gives two sides to this newly found assertiveness. It's been re-engagement of the US. That's what he wants. And the newly found assertiveness is in part designed to force the United States back in. Not exclusively, but partly.
Okay, Anish, your last points, okay, but very briefly, and then Professor will make his final remarks. Would you reply to that?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, sorry, my points actually, in response to your to the answer you gave to Dr. Rani Mullen's question, I think one thing you made which I don't really agree with was that you said that the investment of Saudi Arabia in India was for political reasons and not for commercial reasons. The thing is that, I mean, if you think about the logic of this, would they want to put investments whereby they know they could get, better return elsewhere, or would they want to sink their investments just for political reasons? And the only political reason they mentioned was to move India away from Iran. But the thing is that, India already has relations with the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, and if you really think about it, the investments can actually be attributed to the strength that India has, which is the huge market. You got a population of over 1 billion, and don't you think that that in the Middle East they would want to have access to India, just like how other normal countries like Singapore is investing in India. So do you think that do you want to reconsider your point that these investments may be genuinely for commercial reasons and not for political reasons?
Okay, all right. So,
Okay, I'll try to answer as many things as possible. On the northern tier and southern tier, the interesting thing about the configuration you picked up is that now, while Iran is ready to cooperate with Russia in Syria, Iran doesn't want a role for Russia in the Persian Gulf. Because if you look at it, I'm against all the external powers. Basically, it wants Persian Gulf to a Persianized Gulf. So therefore, that is a very interesting thing. The cooperation operates only on a case-by-case basis, not a regional at level. As you know, right now, Modi is able to engage with all the conflicting groups as long as his agenda is economy. The moment he gets into strategic in the sense that, no, I'm going to support X and Y on that issue, it becomes complicated. I don't think he has the leeway to pick and choose. I think that is probably, in the short run, it's a sensible strategy. Because once you reach a reasonably good economic power, then you can take the next road. Otherwise, you'll be Russia too. You have an enormous military wealth without any economic wherewithal. So probably, we don't want to go to the Gorbachev road, basically. So therefore, today, your choice is to increase the economic capabilities, which is done through the political engagement. That's what my understanding is. That's what I would sum it. On the labor, you're right. The point about the labor, India is also fault. If you remember, in 2006, there was a Lebanese war, and India sent ships to evacuate the citizens from that country. At that time, the estimate said there are about 10,000 Indians were there. Only about 2,000 were willing to come. The remaining said, I put so much money, so much borrowed money, and in a huge interest, I'm here to find a job. If I go back, what do I do? So if you look at it, the people who went to the Gulf, they went because their situation back home was even worse. I think we need to recognize that. Everyone is not the white-collar professionals who want to make an extra life. No. Most of them are working in a basic construction industries. So for them, the 20 hours of work in 45 degrees, 50 degrees is probably better than what you can get back home. That is the ground reality for the entire immigration. We need to accept that. And otherwise, we will be in thing. On Saudi Arabia needing money, yes, I'm not denying that. All I'm submitting is the same argument to you also. Saudi investment in India is not a question. What I'm saying is, Saudi is asking India to take a stakes in Aramco. That is what I'm just looking. I'm not saying Saudi, but when you put that, I'm willing to negotiate India to invest in Aramco, which I think is a political decision. It's not a purely commercial decision. They could ask anybody to do that. Why India? So that is what I would say that, the questions about these countries being small and who are they, all the things are valid. But to be very honest, I just came to Singapore early in the morning. I will not ask this question in Singapore. Honestly, I will not ask this question. And the moment I ask this question, I'm opening a Pandora's box. So I wouldn't do that. So once again, my submission is, no matter how the countries are big, no matter what is the origin of them, no matter how complex they are, I know that the Dubai population is 40% Indian. All you have to do is the JNU-style human chain, the ruler will be in trouble. So, I know the ground demographic realities. But I was sitting in Singapore. I will not cast aspersions on any of these countries. I wouldn't do that mistake. With all due respect, I won't do that. A strategic part, Chabahar, I have my own personal difference over Chabahar. If you look at it, Chabahar is supposed to increase the trade relations with Central Asia. India's trade with the Central Asia, that is the flag we always use. Let's look at it. What is India's trade with Central Asia since 92? Not more than 100 million annually. So if you look at it purely in financial terms, Iran will be a beneficiary of a Chabahar, not India, in the long run. So I have my own doubts about why do you have to invest so much in that. You can say it's a counter Pakistan is fine. Instead of spending so much money, I would rather talk to Pakistan and solve the problem. Instead of going a roundabout way of backdoor entry to Pakistan through Afghanistan and other things. We could have done it. So Chabahar, I have my own personal reservation because at the end of the day, once it is completed, the beneficiary will be Iran, which can move its goods through Chabahar to Central Asia, not India, because India's Central Asia trade is till today not even 100 million in a year. So it's a financially speaking, it's a political decision, but financially I have my own thing. On the Ottoman Empire, my submission is still there. None of the countries are inclusive. It's very easy to say, yes, at the end of the Ottoman Empire, they said everyone who lives in the territory called Turkey is Turks. That is how the constitution defines. It's a very interesting, when you look at it, it's a territorial defined set. It's very interesting. But when you look at the people, they don't feel they are Turks. And if you look at the Turkish constitution, the word Turkish nation comes 18 times. So you have a sizable population who don't feel they are Turk. Whether right and wrong is a different story. That is why I submit all the countries, including Turkey, Israel and no one is exception. The entire Middle East do not have an inclusive national identity. None of them. Including, that's what my question is. Yes, you are trying that US is trying to, MBS and everything, they were trying to bring Trump into picture, yes, in spite of the fact his anti-Muslim rhetoric during the campaign and subsequently. They are somehow hoping that, okay, you will change Obama's pivot to Asia policy and probably more engage with the Gulf and other regions. They were trying for this. On the Israeli one, they are happy with Trump. And one of the interesting thing about Israel is, today all the people who are very prominent are either Republicans or pro-Republicans. So the moment, a Democrat comes to power, all these people will completely disappear. You will have all these people, okay, I know the president from since my school days, and you have a different sets of people coming up in Israel. You know that very well. Once all of them were friends of Obama, they were friends of Bush, so you have a different sets of people coming up and with a logical reason. So I wouldn't see it, they were very happy today, yes. But in the long run, I wouldn't be very, I'll be rather cautious because Middle East is a complex place. So I would submit at that point.
Okay, do you want another additional 2 minutes to sort of expand your thesis from the discussions here if you need to,
okay.
Your concluding remarks?
Because
basically the idea of the critique was, of course, to improve. Since you don't have a written paper, the idea of the critique was naturally to improve your thinking processes so that we have a joint
I would make only 3 broad issues. The region is extremely important. Historically, we never paid sufficient attention to that, in spite of all the positive elements to that. And if you look at a sustained political engagement, even if you call it frequent flyers, but still there is an indication that India is paying attention to the region. That is what I said, turns. He didn't say he was looking, but he turns recognizing that this can be a part of the India's growth story, because in spite of all the other places. But the flip side is, even though the political direction is changing, the nuts and bolts are not done, both in terms of policy, in terms of implementation, in terms of business engagement. I think that is where the flop is there. That is, while Modi is willing to engage with them through economic agenda, because there is nothing political with all the other things, and the results, I would say, is not there as of now. Till today, I don't see tangible results commensurate to the investment you have made. I think that is what, in the sense, it turns, but the results are yet to be shown. That's what the drawback is. I'll stop at this point.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just one anecdote to sort of explain how difficult it is to negotiate with some of the countries with regard to labor. I mean, apart from my foreign affairs, my other portfolio was expatriate labor. And in 2 years, we had sent out 2.5 million Bangladeshis. We formed a group of 11 sending countries called the Colombo Group. You'll find it in the literature, Colombo Group. And we worked up out a notional sort of minimum labor, minimum wage. And we went to negotiate these with the receiving countries in the UAE, in Abu Dhabi. And just for having received us, the Minister for Labor in Abu Dhabi was sacked. You see. So anyway, thank you very much, and I'm sure we will. Some of the discussions we will continue. Continue tomorrow. Continue tomorrow, but well, it will come with different thrusts, etc. The discussions have stimulated thinking in all of us, and I'm sure in you as well. And no one, provides the same thesis twice. But
that's true.
It's not
That's
the force of interventions which will change the thesis, if it at all does. But it's also certainly the force of the intellectual force of the arguments. Thank you very much. We have already eroded into our networking time. I see a couple of minutes. Before that, before I let you go, I'll give you a token of our appreciation. But alas, these have to do with South Asia, which is the region you accord the least importance to. But since
That's an irony part of it.
yours sincerely crafted some of these, I focused on South Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's great.
And thank you for that.